Hi, MS Translators. My name's Brett Drummond, and I'm one of the co-founders of MStranslate. And as you can see from my virtual background, I'm virtually attending the ACTRIMS 2021 meeting currently, which was meant to be held in Phoenix, Arizona, which is behind me here. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we're all attending virtually at the moment. But we've just had day one, so night shift for me in Australia. But we've got through it now, and I just wanted to provide an update on some of the fantastic talks that we've heard so far, as we do with all of these conferences, and we'll be doing over the coming days as well. So the first talk that we heard today was from Benjamin Segal, who's from the Ohio State University, and he gave a really fantastic overview that really just summarized how much we've learned about what the immune system does in multiple sclerosis. Now, I won't go into all of the details that he talked about, but really one of the take-home messages there is just that we've learned so much over the past decade, especially in terms of all of the different cells that are involved in the immune response and how we may be able to use that knowledge to better treat multiple sclerosis. Interestingly, he also looked into how this changes over time. So during the aging process, and examine some of the changes in the immune system that happens as part of that. And aging was a concept that actually came up in a number of talks throughout the day. So another one of the talks that touched on this was Jennifer Graves, who's from UC San Diego. And she brought up this really interesting concept of looking at people living with multiple sclerosis and having to understand the difference between their chronological age, so just how old they are, versus their biological age. And she presented some data from a study where, and I'm pretty sure I've got the numbers right here, she looked at people who were all 38 years old. That was their chronological age, but their biological age ranged from 25 to 60. And that will depend on a lot of different factors, but saying that that's a really important thing to keep in mind when we're treating people living with multiple sclerosis, that actually their biological age may be more important than their chronological age. And so she suggested that actually targeting this aging process could be a novel way to treat multiple sclerosis. And so I guess in that space, one of the things that we've talked about before that relates to this is the metformin trial that's being run by Cambridge. And we'll post the link to the video that we've done on that research before so that you can watch that back if you haven't seen us talk about it before. So one of the other exciting things that happens at the ACTRIMS conference is the awarding of the Baranczyk Prize. And this year it was awarded to Dwight Burgles from Johns Hopkins. And Dwight gave a fantastic overview of his career, which has really been devoted to looking into the process of myelin repair or remyelination, and started this back in 1998 and has been following it ever since. And it was just amazing to see again how much we've learned in this space. We talk about myelin repair being the next big stage in the treatment of multiple sclerosis. And when you see a talk like that and seeing how many different pieces of that puzzle they've managed to put together, it does fill us with a lot of hope that we will be able to get something in that space in the near future. Especially when you see some of the technology that he's currently using, very different to what he might have used back in 1998, but now they're using virtual reality. They're able to track the growth of myelin sheets in 4 dimensions as well. So it's pretty amazing stuff, and that was fantastic to be able to hear. And obviously that's something that we'll continue to follow, because we know that remyelination is definitely a topic that's of great interest to the MS community. We actually had a talk from a fellow Australian during the sessions overnight. So Prince Sebastian, who's from Australian National University in Canberra, gave a talk about risk factors that may be involved in pediatric MS. So pediatric MS being when the onset of disease is less than 18 years of age. And they were particularly interested in environmental risk factors, and particularly around sun exposure. So they looked at actual time spent outside as a measure of sun exposure, and then things like use of sun protection, so covering up with clothing, sunscreen, and various things around this to see whether or not they increased the risk of developing MS. And interestingly, one of the things that they found was that sun exposure definitely did seem to increase the risk of developing multiple sclerosis, particularly if that amount of sun exposure was less than 30 minutes a day. They found that that definitely increased the risk of developing multiple sclerosis in that pediatric population. In terms of looking at pediatric MS, and pediatric MS is quite interesting to a lot of researchers. One, because it's obviously something that we need to know more about because we want to find better treatments for that condition as well, but also because it allows us to view multiple sclerosis at a very early stage. Often in adult onset MS, there may be lots of other things that have happened along the way as part of that aging process, where we can't tell exactly what's multiple sclerosis and what's just part of having gotten older. Obviously, we don't have those same problems in pediatric MS. And so there was a talk by Lauren Krupp, who's from New York University Langone Health, and she was talking about cognition in this population and showed some really interesting data where when you look at people who have been diagnosed with MS as a child, so when their onset was less than 18 years of age, compared with those who had their onset of disease after 18 years of age, and looking at cognition outcomes. And what they find when they look at this in terms of years post-onset, so not in terms of their actual age, just how many years after their onset, they find that in the first few years after diagnosis, people who were diagnosed before 18 in those first few years have better cognitive outcomes than those diagnosed later in life in their first few years after diagnosis. However, what they see over time, and particularly after about 15 years, is that those who were diagnosed as a child actually have much worse cognitive outcomes than those who were diagnosed after the age of 18. And so they're trying to work out what may be involved in causing that real drop-off in that pediatric onset group of people. Lastly, one of the talks which I found particularly interesting was by Rhonda Voskuil, who's from UCLA, and she was talking about the role of sex hormones in multiple sclerosis, again, a topic that is really interesting, but as she pointed out, it's still something that we don't know a lot about in terms of multiple sclerosis compared to what's been looked into in terms of the role of these hormones in other diseases and just in general health. She was particularly talking about the loss of these hormones, and in particular, the loss of estrogen in women with multiple sclerosis when they go through menopause. And so there's been a few little studies, very small studies, that have looked at in terms of treatment with estrogen to prevent that loss of estrogen at that time. And they have seen some benefits through doing that. But as she pointed out, these studies haven't been terribly well designed in terms of the fact that there's a lot of differences between them, and maybe have gone for just trying to get the easiest pilot study out rather than the best designed. And so she actually made a really passionate call at the end of her presentation for a really well-designed phase 2 clinical trial to happen in terms of using or preventing the loss of estrogen in women with multiple sclerosis during menopause. So it will be really interesting to see the outcomes of that and whether or not that trial can get up and running. As always, I've also been spending my time at the conference connecting with a lot of these researchers, and we're really hopeful that we'll be able to feature a number of interviews with them so that they can talk directly to you as well about their research. So a very exciting day one. Hopefully you found this summary to be interesting, covered a number of different topics. As always, if you do have questions, please do just post them below the video and I'll make sure that I respond to them all as quickly as I can. Otherwise, I'll be doing the night shift again for night 2 tonight and providing another update summary tomorrow. So I look forward to doing that and talking to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.